Alright, for today's video, we're going to make this wand here. And I actually made this with a branch from my yard. And it's pretty twisted and split and just wicked and evil looking, but I was going for more of a dark sorcerer, witch, dark mage type wand. There's no real legendarian that this is from, although, as you can see here with the Eye of the Crimson King, this was inspired by the Dark Tower book series and a series of graphic novels. And I made this using my airbrush, a branch from a tree in my yard, and some sculpey, which you can pick up at any hobby store. It's a type of clay that you bake that has a little bit of give and a little bit of flexibility to it. It's not super brittle. All right, let's get into it. Hello, kitty. You look so unhappy. All right, so for today's video, I decided to make a magic wand. That's what today's tutorial is going to be on. I was out trimming the trees on my property, and I found this nice specimen here that I could shave the bark off of and the leaves and turn into a nice custom magic wand. This won't be based off anything in the Harry Potter Legendarium or anything like that. I have done several Harry Potter wands and several other wands at this point, but I haven't filmed any of it. They've all been gifts, actually. One went to my dad, one went to my niece. They're both Harry Potter fans, and several others I made as well. One this guy bought off me. He commissioned me to make it for him for Christmas, to give to this girl that he liked, although he was a fool and he screwed that all up. But anyways, yeah. Alright, now that I got the branch inside, I'm going to want to keep this larger, thicker end, and as it tapers down here in the front, I don't need all that. And most wands are about 14, 16 inches. I'm going to cut this one off a little bit longer, and I'm going to chop it about here. That'll make it about 2 feet. Of course, that's way too long. But after I strip the leaves down and everything, I'm going to decide the exact length that I want it. But first, I'm going to cut it right there. Right, I cut this down to length. I was initially considering cutting this flat, but I kind of like the angle and the taper of it. And once I get all the bark stripped off here and whittled down and sanded down, this is going to look radically different, of course, but I'm going to use Sculpey to actually sculpt parts of the handle and bake the Sculpey on the wood and finish it like that. But first, I pulled off all of these little branches and pieces. I didn't cut it. If you want something cleaner and nicer looking, definitely cut it. I want some of these knots and stuff in it, and like I say, I'm going to work it into the overall shape of the wand. So I just tore them off. But the next thing you're going to need to do is dry this. In order to dry this properly and quickly, you're going to need to remove the bark. Now, some trees, especially that maybe you have a piece that's older and more dead, it may peel off. In certain varieties, you can just peel it off, whenever it's green. But this one, I got a feeling I'm probably going to have to use a knife and whittle sections of it off. If that's the case and you're underage or a minor, ask your parents to help you with this, or if you have their permission to do it. Don't just go grab knives and start hacking on stuff, kids. Yeah, and so far I've been able to get a lot of this off just by using my fingernails and just peeling strips of it off. It comes off pretty easy since it's green. Like I say, each type of wood's different. Depending on what you have to use, this may or may not work. And even though this is coming off pretty easily, a lot of times when I get to areas like knots and stuff, it gets a little tough and doesn't want to come loose, and end up having to use a knife anyways. So we'll see how this all works out. But yeah, I'm just going to continue to strip all the bark off this. Alright, I peeled all the bark off of it, and I'm going to let it sit out in the sun for a couple hours. It's pretty hot and dry here today. That'll help start off the process, but I'm not going to leave it out here for the full length of the drying. And part of the reason for that is I don't want the sun to warp it, which may possibly happen, and I also don't want the sun to bleach it out too much. I just want to start the process off. I'm just going to let it finish drying the rest of the way in my garage so I can start my sanding and carving and shaping. Alright, now that this has had ample time to dry, I'm going to go ahead and start smoothing out the areas where the branches were, and in general, just tapering this down. And I'm going to do that using a Dremel with a rough grit sanding wheel, just to get the process started. But you can do all this by hand. It's going to take a lot longer. Whenever I make Harry Potter wands, I don't use, obviously, a tree branch. That would be really cool if I did. I don't. I use a dowel rod. and I make the handle part that you grip out of Sculpey, and I sculpt it. But, you know, for things like the Harry Potter wands, or if you're not using a stick and using a dowel rod, you probably want to just hand sand it. But there's a lot more work that I have to do to this to get it done, and this is going to be a dark magic evil wand. I want it to look twisted and gnarly, so if there's any mess ups involving this, it will probably just add to the project. But if you're trying to do a smooth, even straight wand and you're using something like a dowel rod, I would definitely recommend hand sanding that only. Alright, so that first pass with the Dremel was just to get the top layer off, get this smoothed down, and start to work out some of these knots and work down some of these knots a little bit. The next one, I'm going to start and do another layer, but I'm not going to start all the way back here. I'm going to start here and go end to end again, and gradually keep working that up until I start tapering this down into a tip. Alright, whatever sawdust didn't fly off into the air, you can see the piles of it everywhere, took off a decent amount of it. And off camera, I just lightly sanded this off. You can still see some of the original dark color from it drying. And I also wanted to just kind of round down this edge. But you can see here, I already have my basic wand shape. Next thing I'm going to move on to is hand shaping and hand sanding. I'm going to start off with a rough grit, much like I have here, to finish shaping this end of it. And then I'm going to work from the rough 70 grit down to some 600 fine grit to get this nice and smooth. Alright, now I got a nice even rounded wand shape here on the end that gradually gets larger as you go down and has a nice taper overall to it, but you know, I was able to retain some of these knotted looking areas like there and there. It's not too obnoxious and it's a little more defined there, but as I go down, you'll probably maybe notice in the video I didn't use the 600 grit past here. I want it to get gradually rougher as you go down towards the handle. And now I'm going to take this stuff here called Sculpey. It's an oven baked clay, and you bake it at about 275 for every 1/4 inch. And this stuff's pretty resilient. It doesn't bake up extremely brittle. It has the slightest bit of give. It's not much, but it's pretty good for anything that is going to be relatively thick and solid. And I usually use it for the wand handles. Although with the current shape and the way this looks, you could just paint this as it is and weather it and lacquer it, and it'd look pretty good. But I'm going to go ahead and add some Sculpey over this and start molding it. Okay, so after the initial molding of this stuff, first of all, a couple quick things about this sculpey. It has kind of a consistency of Play-Doh, and it's pretty elastic, but not completely. It will tear and wrinkle, and I don't know if you noticed, I was smoothing it out with my finger. I know all that's going to be sped up, but get little creases and stuff, and I end up having to smooth them out with my finger so it looks smooth. And this is not the way I'm going to leave this. Next, I'm going to start carving it up a little bit, and what I'm going to use to carve it is my buddy Tony gave me this wax carving set. It didn't have everything in it, but it's got all these cool little tools and picks and things like that that I'm going to use to go ahead and carve some details into this. Alright, now that I have carved my design in and smoothed it out, I have it in my oven. And the oven's at 275, and that's so I can finish baking this. And it's about 15 minutes per 1/4 inch, and I'm going to bake this probably close to a half hour. Alright, so I finished baking this and took it out of the oven. I didn't show the carving, but it took quite a long time, actually. And a lot of it was just smoothing it out and getting the fingerprints out of it. Then I went through and crumpled up some saran wrap and just kind of blotted it to put a few extra pits and stuff in it. I also carved the eye of the Crimson King up here in the top part of it. And this is pretty much cooled. I'm going to let it cool the rest of the way. I want to point out here that, this is wood that you're putting in the oven. Keep an eye on it. I checked it about every 5 minutes or so just to make sure that, it wasn't getting, that it wasn't going to catch on fire. And it even says in the packaging, don't do the baking unless you're an adult. So don't do the baking unless you're an adult. Have a parent or guardian do it if you're younger. Alright, so I've sanded this a bit. And next, I am going to take some black acrylic opaque paint and load up my airbrush and paint this all black. Alright, after I painted both sides black, I went back through with the airbrush and I mixed up a brown, got to the color that I wanted, and I thinned it out considerably. I didn't film it, the painting of it, because it's so thin that I'm just gradually building up layers and layers and layers until I get the color change and everything that I want. And next, I'm going to take some rather thinned out red and spray some right on this eye. I may even dust the very tip of it. I haven't quite decided yet. Alright, so I did end up painting the tip red. I just kind of phased it into the brown. I like the way it turned out. And I just kind of blasted the center of the eye. And now, the final thing I'm going to do with this is take it and spray the whole thing down with a high gloss lacquer. And to spray this, I'm going to be using the brand is Valspar for the lacquer. I'm just going to go ahead and put some even coats over it. Alright, now that I have the lacquer on here, it really made the color pop, and I'm pretty stoked with the way that it looks. I did this all in about a day. The only thing I had to wait for was I had to wait 24 hours for the lacquer to dry. So yeah, this got done pretty quick, and it was a pretty simple build. Hopefully it gave you some, all of the viewers out there, some ideas on your own cosplays, whether it's magical or otherwise. And as always, thank you for watching. And if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe.